Hello, fourth year students. Today's lecture in literary criticism is about psychoanalytic criticism. We are still in the modern age and we are dealing with different schools of criticism. And psychoanalytic criticism is actually one of the, let's say, we can say one of the recent schools of criticism in which the theory of psychoanalysis by Sigmund Freud has influenced the formation of such kind of criticism. So if we try to trace down the influence of psychology in the understanding of literary text, we will see that actually it is not something totally new, since we know that critics, rhetoricians, philosophers, since ancient times actually, it's not something totally new. Since the time of Aristotle, have examined the psychological dimensions of literature, ranging from an author's motivation and intentions to the effect of texts and performances on an audience. So it is not something that we haven't witnessed before. Actually, the analysis of the psychological, let's say, influence of works of literature on the audience, or we can say even the motivations, the study of the analysis of the motivation, the psychology behind the writing of certain literary works has been something that we noticed since the ancient times, since the time of Aristotle. But actually, we are talking here about something more, let's say, systematic, something that is basically more, let's say, disciplined. We are talking about discipline here. After the psychology has become, let's say, a field of knowledge by itself, after it has its own terms, now we can see or we can witness how it influenced other fields like literature. So the application of psychoanalytic principles to the study of literature, this is what we are talking about here, is a relatively recent phenomena, okay? After the emergence of psychology as a science, as a field of knowledge by itself, now we see the application of its theories on literature. By whom, actually? It was initiated primarily by Sigmund Freud. He's the most famous. He is actually the one who pioneered psychoanalysis. And in other directions, Alfred Adler and Carl Jung, actually they are students of Sigmund Freud. They developed the theories that Sigmund Freud has initiated. What are the main aspects of psychoanalysis? When we speak about psychoanalysis, we are talking about, first of all, the unconscious. This is one of the new terms that we are dealing with. We know the conscious, and the opposite is the unconscious. Sometimes it is called subconscious. Okay? Freud's fundamental contribution was to open up the entire realm of the unconscious to systematic study. So maybe you are aware of such things, but nobody has ever coined terms and made theories or tried to make studies about the unconscious, just like what Sigmund Freud has did. So what does this system, or let's say, what does this systematic study provide in terms of knowing or understanding the unconscious? So he actually gave language and terminology, okay, in which the operations of the unconscious could be expressed. He tried to make it something clear, or to propose that there are, for example, stages or levels, or there are some, let's say, some kind of operations that happen in the mind, or there is a kind of language, or so he tried to organize or to manage the study of the unconscious, the positing of an unconscious as what? The ultimate source and explanation of human thought and behavior. So there's this new idea that the unconscious is considered to be the ultimate source. It's the most important source. It is where all the behavior of human beings come from. Their thoughts, their behavior. represented, actually this idea was so extreme, if we can call it, so extreme, something totally new and shocking at the same time. So it represented a radical disruption. It was so radical to think like this of the mainstreams of Western thought, which since Aristotle had held that man was essentially a rational being. This is what we all agree upon. This is what we all know since ages, that men are actually distinguished by being rational creatures. Unlike any other creature, we are rational. We act upon our, let's say, rational decisions, reason. We depend on our reason in our minds. But what this idea, this new idea does, it undermines this idea of rationality. Also, it undermines what? That human beings are capable of making free choices. So we cannot claim anymore that you are doing what you are doing, because this is something based on your free choice or free will. You are behaving based on the motivations that come from the unconscious, which you don't have a great deal of control upon. So this, of course, influences your decisions, and it also influences your moral judgment. Okay? So if we look at the things that have clearly been influenced by this new concept, we can say that things that are questioned, okay, like what? The ideal of self-knowledge. How can you now claim that you know yourself clearly? Okay, if the source of your own thoughts and behavior is unknown to you, and at the same time you cannot control it. The ability to know others. So if you can't know yourself, it's very it comes easily to you that of course you are not going to know other people. You don't know yourself already. The capacity to make moral judgments. So you cannot judge people morally now. It's very difficult to give your own moral judgment about things, especially when you are not sure of the motivation behind them. The belief that we can act according to reason. So this is undermined. You're not using your reason. You are using what? Something that is deep inside you, but you don't have control over it. That we can overcome our passions and instincts. So Freud is saying here that your instincts and your passions motivates you to speak, to act, to do things, to like things, to dislike things. You see? So you are driven by these passions and instincts, okay? And you are not all the time able to overcome them. The ideas of moral and political agency. So how can you decide, for example, who's the person responsible for this action or that? Okay? Intentionality. So now it is really hard to decide whether this person is acting based on a certain intention. What are your intentions in doing so and so? Okay? And the notion held for centuries that literary creation can be a rational process. So this is what we are concerned with as we are studying literary criticism. What about the literary works? They are the product, we can say the product of writers, poets, people. They are just people who are creating literary text, whether they are poems, novels, whatever they are. How can we now trust that they are doing this based on their rational minds? This idea is also undermined. Okay? So according to Freud, notice this, we cannot claim fully to comprehend even ourselves. Why we act as we do, why we make certain moral and political decisions, why we harbor given religious disposition. So you can't tell, of course, why you are following this religion or that party or this political leader, or this is very difficult to decide or to say exactly what are your reasons for this. Okay, and intellectual orientations. even when we think we are acting from a given motive. So sometimes you are actually, if you ask anyone, or if you ask someone why you are following this idea or that person, or why do you like this football team, or why do you like this person, they are going to give you many reasons. But according to Freud, actually, we cannot claim that we know the motives, the real motives behind our actions and behavior. We may be deluding ourselves. So, according to Freud, this is just a form of self-delusion, okay? And much of our thought and action is not freely determined by us, but driven by unconscious forces, which we can barely fathom. We can barely actually go deep inside ourselves and know why we have such ideas. Sometimes we are able to know things, but deep inside, this is very difficult. So we are driven, according to this analysis, by unconscious forces. They are forces, actually. But the problem with them is they are totally unknown to us. Moreover, far from being based on reason, our thinking is intimately dependent upon the body, upon its instincts of survival and aggression. So there is another thing which controls us, which is what? Our bodies. And when we are speaking about the body, we are talking about instincts. We are talking about this part of ourselves, which is based on our material composition or being. We are human beings. We are composed of certain biological elements. We have instincts, instincts which keep us alive, instincts which keep us or make us able to defend ourselves, to survive. You see, other features about our bodies, like, for example, the color of the skin, the size, the gender, whether we are male or females, the social situation we are living within, all these things also influence how we behave or how we speak or how we, let's say, think, or what are the actions that we do, what are our preferences. All these things influence that. So how can we claim that we are able to understand the real motives for our behavior? There is also another concept, which is the interpretation of dreams. Freud's own literary analyses tend to apply his models of dream interpretation. Actually, Freud used to make analysis for his patients for their dreams. They would tell him their dreams, and he tried to analyze their dreams based on what? Based on certain record of the patient's life. He takes, of course, a lot of notes about their lives, about their memories, what have they done through their daily basis. And then he comes up with a certain analysis in order to understand why this person is having a problem here, or what's his main conflict or problem, why his dreams keep repeating itself. For example, if there is a certain pattern in their dream, and based on that interpretation, he's able to understand this person's psychological conflict. Okay, and one of the main ideas or conclusions, we can say, that Freud came up with when speaking about dream interpretation is that what? That they are what? Expressions of wish fulfillment and gratifying projections. They are projections of what? Of the ego of an author. So, and I always give this example of Coleridge. We know that one of his very famous poems, Kubla Khan, is a result of a dream. He was taking opium as he was reading about Kubla Khan in a book, and because he was under the influence of the opium, he fell asleep. He saw Kubla Khan in his dreams, he saw the dome of pleasures, and then after waking up, what did he do? He wrote down this poem. So this poem was actually the product of his dreams. And by the analysis of the poem, Actually, when we analyzed the poem, you remember last year when we analyzed the poem, we needed to go back to his life and see the kind of psychological influence or things that we can analyze psychologically in his life so that we can understand the poem. What is it about? So sometimes dreams can really help understand the person's psychological state. So the field of psychoanalytic criticism encompasses, sorry, this is wrong, encompasses, we can, encompasses what? So what do we find when we apply psychoanalytic criticism? If I am a critic and I want to use psychoanalysis as my approach, an analysis of the motive of an author, okay, I can use it to analyze author's motives, readers, and also what? Fictional characters. I can apply this approach to different objectives. For example, I can analyze the author. Sometimes I need to know the reader's psychology, why they react in a certain way to a text, not in another way. Sometimes the fictional characters, especially if we are talking about characters that are developed throughout the whole work, from the beginning till the end, we notice, for example, a character changes. Relating a text to features of the author's biography, so I need to go back to his life, okay, such as what? Such as childhood memories, okay, relationship to parents. Sometimes it's, let's say, the trauma of the relationship with parents is the main reason for certain author to write in a certain way. The nature of the creative process, okay, so how these ideas or fancy, or let's say the inspiration, where does it come from? Where does it come from to the poet or the writer? What are the things that the writer do in order to write? Where does the inspiration come to him? The psychology of reader's response. What about the reader? Why certain, for example, readers react to a text in a different way? Well, it's the same text, but we have different reactions. You see, if you go back to the psychology of the readers, each one alone, you can understand the reason. Interpretation of symbols in a text. Sometimes, actually, this is one of Freud's maybe favorite topics, because he likes to interpret things inside the text as symbols for other things. Okay, this is one of the main features of psychoanalysis by Freud. To unearth latent meanings, analysis of the connections between various authors in a literary tradition. Sometimes actually writers are really, or deeply, we can say, influenced by each other. They write certain way because they are influenced by other writers from the same period maybe, or the same literary tradition. Examination of gender roles. Gender roles also is something really significant here, because, for example, you find women writers writing based on certain experiences they had as females. So if you don't pay attention to this detail, you can't understand, for example, why this writer or that she writer is focusing on a certain point that is related more to gender or to females or to women. Okay, for example. And stereotypes and the functioning of language and the constitution of the conscious and the unconscious. Sometimes language, if you study the language, you can understand what lies behind it. And this is what Freud actually talked about when he said that a person, when he slips, this is what you call the slips of the tongue, زلات اللسان, slips of the tongue. Sometimes you speak something without being aware, and then you try to make up for it and to say something else. So Freud says this thing that you mistakenly said reveals things about your true intention. Okay. And finally, what similarity there is between the psychoanalyst and the writer? So the psychoanalyst creates a fiction upon what? Upon the patient's experiences, patient's troubles, neurosis, recollection. And based on this fiction, what does he do? He tries to find what? A therapy for this patient. Okay, this is what a psychoanalyst does. In the same manner, we see that actually the author and the writer also creates kind of a narrative, just like the psychoanalyst. He tried to make psychological analysis for his characters, and based on that psychoanalytic analysis, what does he do? He creates a story, narrative, characteristics of this character, qualities of this character. So both the psychoanalyst and the author deal with, let's say, the psychoanalyst deals with the patient and creates the story of the patient, the fiction or the narrative of the patient's life, and the author at the same time works just like a psychoanalyst. He creates the narrative of a character's life. So this is what makes both of them at a certain point similar to each other. So that was all for psychoanalytic criticism. Thank you for your listening.